Good morning to you, and I'm glad that you have found time to be with us this morning. It is just a minute past 11 a.m. East African time. The show is Unfiltered, and this we get to bring you up to date with the news that we've been following up for you for the week, and also the current and what is happening across the continent of Africa. So before we get into the detailed news bulletin, let's first look at the headlines from across Africa and other parts of the world. We start with the papers from Kenya. The Standard newspaper. How Kalonzo goof cost him the presidency. Why bill on more taxes is likely to pass easily. And no, hold on. Let me just, that was yesterday's. The Standard newspaper, I apologize for that. Blackmail that saved Ruto from ICC jurors, with the West favoring one party in elections while Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto are facing trial at the International Criminal Court. The two had access up their sleeves, China factor and UK defense contract agreement. You'll find that in there. But I think that new book by Aden Tuale, it's being serialized in one of the newspapers there. Maribe Joey on the defense in Monica murder case. Reprieve for Joho in warehouse fight with KPA. Safaricom profits drop by 22%. We look at the Star newspaper. Major split in Ruto Raila talks agenda. Azimio list audit of 2022 presidential election server. Rising cost of living as part of its agenda. And the main pictorial is Sauti Soul. Sign up. Prepare for big night with Boys to Men. That is going to be very interesting, I'm sure. Why Uhuru's fate as Jubilee boss now lies with registrar. And Joey, how I accidentally shot myself over text message. I feel like this story keeps changing. Every now and then we have an opportunity to hear what's going on. That story in the court is like a different version every time. But hey, someone died, and so answers and some had tough questions have to be answered anyway. The Daily Nation, Brutus dream team in Reach State Farms. Okay. And then now unions demand pay for junior high teachers, and Safaricom mulls high-value loans with more bank deals. The People Daily revealed intrigues in Kibaki succession. How high cost polls hit housing sector hard. Azimio cracks whip against rebel senators. And then the Business Daily, rich Kenyans get helicopter tax cuts in Ruto budget plan. What? But they will add more taxes on makeup. You're supposed to tax these people who can afford helicopters. How do they get a tax cut? Explain that to me. But anyway, fact of the matter is that most of what we have are zombie banks only surviving because of regulatory forbearance by the central bank. That is an opinion piece there at the Business Daily. M-Pesa deepens share in Safaricom revenue as voice starters. The Nairobian, Bunge's Timmy. Okay, I'll leave that. All right, let's just move on. Taifa Leo. Ugali kuzidi kuwa gali. That is, unga is expected to be more expensive. I think that is not some news that Kenyans wants to look at. We head over to Uganda. The Daily Monitor. No money for LC polls as their term expires. About 80,000 local council 1 and 2 leaders could stay in office longer, albeit illegally. After it emerged, there was no budgetary allocation for the exercise, with just about 2 months left to the end of the tenure. Masaka Road closed over floods. The Guardian from Nigeria. Underutilization, debts hobble, $4.1 billion rail rehabilitation project, and NASS leadership aspirants adamant despite APC's promise to revisit zoning. The Nation as well from Nigeria. Free Kanu as parting gift, Ohanaize tells Buhari. President Tinubu either celebrate Faso Ranti at 97. But where was President-elect Tinubu? I thought he already left for I think he went to France. He's in love with France, and Buhari was in love with is in love with London. I think he's still there. So was he celebrating, or on Twitter, or he sent a message of best wishes? But anyway, Wike, Makinde, others shun parley with Atiku PDP leaders and APC chairman to aggrieved lawmakers hold your fire. Okay. The Daily Trust, also from Nigeria, uncertainty over multi-million naira Abuja Airport runway project criticisms trailed fresh 3.4 billion naira consultancy fee. Stakeholders flay delay in project execution. 65 billion naira budgeted in 5 years. Northwest deserves the Senate presidency, right? And then the Citizen this is from Tanzania, experts fix defects in education policy draft. Experts and education activists yesterday identified what they said were shortcomings in the education policy draft released earlier in the week and called for its review to address existing quality issues in the sector. All right, so their curriculum is 1642/33. Okay, I will not even attempt to dacify that. Azori Gwanda government urges public to volunteer information, and why Tanzania wants Tulia to head World Parliamentary Body. Daily News from Zimbabwe. Let voters clear fate of elections. Mliswa urges afresh calls for polls referendum. USA government accuses South Africa on Ukraine war. I do have the story in detail. The Herald from Zimbabwe as well. Import restrictions on basics lifted. 100% forex retention on local earnings. Treasury adopts external government loans. Zimbabwe open for business, not abuse. That is what the president said. But you let all these people abuse Zimbabwe and its wealth and its dignity, President Mnangagwa. Okay, anyway. Let's move on to Newsday. Still from Zimbabwe. Kobe scrambles to rescue Zimbabwean dollar. Very well. And then some newspapers from the UK. The Daily Mail. Don't say convicts, it upsets criminals. So what do we call them? And call ex-cons prison leavers or persons with lived experience. I guess we're just changing everything. We're changing the pronouns. We're changing. Okay, so you don't say convicts. This upsets the criminals. Okay, instead, according to this newspaper, and call ex-cons prison leavers. Well, if I call you a prison leaver, obviously that means you've been a prisoner, so you've just left. Prison leaver. Which one is much? Which one sounds terrible? Ex-con or prison leaver? Because that prison name there is just, I think, is much heavier. And then, or call them persons with lived experience. This I disagree, because all of us have lived experience in different areas of our lives, and so we can't just take this and put it on people who have been to prison and as if the rest of us don't have any lived experience. Sometimes, we give advice and all these things, and perhaps our points of our opinions and all that, because we do have a lived experience. So if now this title will be reserved to people who have the ex-convicts, now that they don't want to be called ex-convicts, we call them persons with lived experience. That I disagree, but maybe the prison leavers, I don't know, man. So addict from prison service to warders, that's beyond parody. So that, I don't know. That is in the UK, so let's just leave that there. And another interesting title up there that I will not even get into. The Daily Telegraph, go back to work and we can cut tax by 2%. Why Justin Welby should be ashamed of himself. That's interesting. Okay. He criticized the small boats bill. I don't know if it passed, over Britain stand on immigration and those who are crossing over through the English Channel to access Britain illegally. So he criticized that the other day. So someone there is telling him to get some shame. The Times, food prices on way back down. and then Eurovision buzz address by Zelensky, the rise of the badly behaved house seller. The Daily Express, wrong, wrong, wrong. What is that? How can we trust the Bank of England when its predictions on recession, unemployment, and inflation have so far been, oh, wrong, wrong, wrong? Okay. All right. Let's just move on to The Guardian now. The UK edition. UK sends long-range missiles to Ukraine in fast for West. All right. And then Guantanamo Bay detainee describes depravity of U.S. torture. MP accuses shadow minister of assault. And iNews, new UK inflation warning as hunted meets key pledge may be broken. The Independent, mortgage misery for millions as rates hit 4.5%. Banks beat to tackle stubbornly high inflation forces homeowners to pay hundreds of pounds more a month. Very well. And then we look at some newspapers from the U.S. The Guardian, U.S. edition. U.S.-Mexico border braces for midnight, lifting of Title 42 migrant restrictions. And I was just watching a news item on that. I think so many migrants are just waiting for that restriction to be lifted, with the hopes of accessing the U.S. Some of them have come. A lot of them are not exactly from Mexico, but from the other parts of the South America, those countries, the Latin America, countries. What was CNN thinking? Our panel on Donald Trump's town hall. I think that town hall has raised a lot of debate as from whether it was necessary for CNN to allow President Trump to be interviewed or to take part in the town hall, and also why they decided to bring Trump supporters to make up the audience who were just clapping and cheering at everything he said. And a lot of it are these lies that he's spewed over the years and things that really did not make any sense. Like when he was saying, misogyny and, men of, of privileged positions taking advantage of, women and all that. And he was saying this has existed from millions of years. Like, what are you talking about, really? So, and he had his own crowd there cheering and clapping. So, it looked like a rally, a MAGA rally, actually. So, but anyway, they did discuss some important issues there, and he does not care about taking responsibility. So, anyway, that has raised a lot of debate, but that is not our problem, is it? Let's move on to the New York Post. Surrender, that is the main headline. Biden orders border agents to let migrants in with no tracking or conditions. And the next asylum court date is 2035. The USA Today, end of Title 42 at border brings last-ditch flurry. Santos arrested, pleads not guilty. That lying representative from New York, George Santos. Okay. Americans divided on plans to forgive student loan debt. The New York Times, let me see. There's so many of them. Pressure rises along the border and in Washington. Seeking order during surge as rules ease, a wave driven by factors beyond U.S. control. Trump lays out second-term vision, wrecking norms. Okay. As U.S. COVID emergency ends, monitoring shifts to the C words. Republicans in swing districts struck in middle of debt debate. The Washington Post, 6 decades later, fighting a racist legacy of pollution. Rise of AI presents a security challenge. Record migrant surge at border. CNN brass under fire for Trump town hall. That was expected. That's that response. But also CNN's polling has not been doing very well. So I think they needed something like that to bring back their viewership. I think it has really dipped. So they needed to bring, I don't know, some MAGA supporters from Fox News or somewhere else, because there also seems to be trouble there. So I think they did that intentionally for ratings or something like that. And that has attracted a lot of backlash. So I don't know if it will work in their favor, or I don't know what is going to happen. I think time will tell if at all that was a smart idea. But in the world which prouds itself freedom of speech and all that, then if you could look at it from that perspective, then CNN had a right. But considering the person that you're going to bring and the kind of lies he spews, and you do not have a real-time fact checker, that for other people is a bit problematic. It's about 16 minutes past 11 a.m. here in Nairobi, East African time. And let us get into some of the stories that we have been looking at for you over the week, and also that are developing stories. They continue to develop, and new information is coming up. Like yesterday, I was telling you about the EAC and the new position that the Democratic Republic of Congo is taking. The President Tshisekedi, when he attended the summit by SADC, and he went to Botswana and Namibia, and he made certain comments there that I personally took some issues with in regards to the East Africa Community forces. And so this morning, or just after I talked about it yesterday, the East African Community has urged the Democratic Republic of Congo's leader to respect regional states' move to deploy forces in an attempt to stabilize eastern parts of his country. President Felix Tshisekedi on Tuesday accused the East African force of not doing its job, warning if it did not do so by June, it will be asked to leave DRC. Let me add there, for good. He also accused the force of colluding with M23 rebels. EAC Secretary General Peter Mathuki said he had not received any communication regarding Mr. Tshisekedi's complaints, saying any issues raised will be discussed by EAC heads of state. The EAC chief earlier told French public radio RFI that the criticisms of the force were not justified. DR Congo's criticism of the East African forces came a day after the Southern Africa Development Community SADC approved the deployment of troops to the east of the country. And South Africa rand crashed on Thursday, minutes after the U.S. ambassador accused the country of providing weapons and ammunition to Russia. The currency lost more than 30 cents of its value against the dollar, according to local media. This was the rand's weakest record low set in 2020. Okay. And then we head over to Sudan. And Sudan's warring parties signed a commitment late Thursday on guidelines for allowing humanitarian assistance, U.S. officials have said. Representatives of the army and paramilitary forces who have been fighting for nearly a month signed the agreement in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, in a declaration of commitment to protect the civilians of Sudan. A U.S. official involved in the talk said the commitment is not a ceasefire, but rather aims to help secure humanitarian aid. The agreement requires both sides to permit humanitarian assistance, to allow the restoration of electricity, water, and other basic services, to withdraw security forces from hospitals, to arrange for respectful burial of the dead. Earlier on Thursday, the UN Human Rights Council barely managed to pass a motion to increase monitoring of human rights abuses in Sudan, where hundreds of civilians have been killed since the conflict began last month. Backed by the United Kingdom and the United States, the motion passed 18 to 15. The initiative grants the UN's Sudan expert more powers to monitor abuses. Among other measures, it was watered down several times in recent days in order to gain approval. Back to that story about South Africa. The U.S. ambassador to Pretoria has made a damning accusation against the South Africa government, and it seems to have caught South Africa officials off guard. Ambassador Ruben Brigetti says the U.S. has reliable intelligence that South Africa supplied arms and ammunition to Russian ships, which had docked for about 2 days at the Simon's Town Naval last December. It is thought that the arms and ammunition of Russia's war in Ukraine. For months, the U.S. has been critical of South Africa's close relationship with Russia. This includes South Africa's decision to carry out military exercises with Russia and China during the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine earlier this year. South Africa has repeatedly said it is neutral on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Hot on the heels of the ambassador's accusation, an opposition member of parliament ambushed South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa with a question about it in parliament, pressing him for clarity. Mr. Ramaphosa responded by saying that the whole matter is being looked into Allow the process to continue. In time, we will be able to speak on it. So he's not denying. All right. Okay, let's just go ahead and we'll come back to look at that story. And heading back to Sudan again, the UN Human Rights Council has voted to increase monitoring of human rights abuses in Sudan. A total of 18 countries voted in favor of the Western-led initiative at a special session in Geneva, while 15 voted against and 14 abstained. Sudan itself had vigorously opposed the motion, arguing that the conflict was an internal affair. Earlier, the session had renewed calls for an immediate ceasefire to help efforts to get urgently needed humanitarian assistance in Sudan. Hundreds of civilians have been killed since fighting erupted last month between Sudan's rival and military factions. And back in the country, Kenya, will transition Dadaab and Kakuma refugee camps into integrated settlements, which refugees are expected to coexist with host communities and benefit from government services as the state starts the planned closure of the two camps over security concerns. An intergovernmental steering committee was launched on Wednesday to align the transition plan with the country's national security priorities and laws. According to Kenya's Interior Principal Secretary Raymond Amolo, other key priorities of the committee that will be coordinated by Interior Minister Kithure Kindiki include heightening border security and screening to prevent an influx of more refugees and enforcement of law and order in the settlements. And Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has renewed calls for a ceasefire in Sudan and warned the army against personalizing the country. Museveni on Wednesday met the special envoy of the chairman of the Transitional Sovereignty Council in Sudan, Dafala Al-Haj Ali, at State House in Entebbe, where the two are said to have discussed the conflict in the northern African country, where two rival generals are fighting for control. And President Museveni tweeted, and I'll quote, "A ceasefire is critical to allow peace for people to elect their leaders as owners of the country. The country does not belong to the Sudan army, it belongs to the people." End of quote. This is coming from Museveni. Quite rich, huh? And Sudan has plunged into the latest round of fighting on April 15th between the country's national army led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces commanded by his former deputy and fellow coup leader, Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo Hemeti. And back to South Africa. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has given an assurance that his government is not sleeping on the job as the country experiences crippling power cuts. Answering questions in Parliament, Ramaphosa said 3 ministers were working to resolve the crisis, including restructuring the state-owned power company Eskom. Many households and businesses have to go without power for more than 10 hours a day in the worst electricity crisis to hit South Africa. The power crisis has also affected the currency market. South African rand hit a 3-year low against the US dollar on Thursday. And then in Zimbabwe, a report by a UK-based organization has accused the daughter of, not Zimbabwe, but in South Africa. Today we are in South Africa a lot, I apologize, in South Africa. A report by a UK-based organization has accused the daughter of ex-South African President Jacob Zuma of helping Russia launder information on the war on Ukraine. The Center for Information Reliance says pro-Russian tweets by Duduzile Zuma Sambudla were at the forefront of Moscow's drive to sway public opinion to its side in South Africa and beyond. Zuma Sambudla is a prominent figure in South Africa and a South African tweeter with more than 237,000 followers. Zuma did not respond to the allegations. The researchers relied on the personal nature of what has been posted on the account, including photographs and the discussion in South African media of the tweets as evidence that she owns it, Bloomberg reported on Wednesday. South Africa has come under attack from the West over its neutral stance on Ukraine. The organization, which claims to research human rights abuses and disinformation, is funded by, among others, the US, the UK governments, the leading suppliers of arms to Ukraine. Yes. And in Senegal, President Macky Sall intervened personally, according to his services, to try to settle this week a land dispute between a traditional community of Dakar and the state, source of violent clashes. The Libas protest against a project to build a gendarmerie in the district of Ngoro has hardened in recent days and has caused violent confrontations which culminated on Tuesday between part of the population and the gendarmeries. According to images released on Wednesday by the presidency, Macky Sall met last Tuesday night with the representatives of the Ngoro and Libas. He decided to share equally the land between the gendarmerie and the population and announced the construction of a high school. Images circulating on social media networks and previously shown groups of young people clashing with stones and incendiary devices against a large force of law enforcement officials responding with tear gas. Witnesses describe a neighborhood condoned of by the gendarmeries and made almost inaccessible. No human toll has been officially reported. The gendarmerie did not respond to the media. The Minister of Interior reported on Wednesday in a statement the discovery of the body of a teenager of about 15 years on the beach of Ngor, but said she had probably been killed by the propeller of a boat. The Libas are a traditional fishing group living in the Dakar Peninsula and on the west coast of Senegal. They have been opposing for weeks the erection of the gendarmerie post on a parcel of land of more than 6,000 square meters, which they claim they own. They denounced the lack of infrastructure for the use of the population in a very popular neighborhood. They regularly rise up against the monopolization of their ancestral lands in a rapidly expanding city, subject to significant land and real estate pressure. The government, for its part, claimed to have bought the plot from its owner. The fever in Go coincided with, but was not linked to tensions caused by the possible exclusion of opposition politician Osman Sonko from the presidential race in 2024. The threat of ineligibility weighing on him makes fear a violent reaction of his supporters. So basically, in short, after saying all that, President Macky Sall was being accused of wanting to grab a piece of land from that neighborhood. Yes. All right, and we end in Zambia. French President Emmanuel Macron welcomed his Zambian counterpart Hakainde Hichilema in France. The thorny topic of the restructuring of Zambia's debt was among top issues since France co-chaired of the creditor committee with China. On the sidelines of their conversation, Hichilema gave an interview to the AFP in which he pleaded for economic diplomacy at a time when some analysts predict a return to a bipolar world. And this is what he said: "Our continent, Africa, has been lagging behind." The Zambian president said, "We must do something dramatic to lift Africa up. We must continue with the old ways." And that's why in our talk with President Macron, as I said, it was a debt issue, but also the opportunities for investment, for trade. And he continued, quoting President Hakainde, "And in this investment, Africa now, our shift is Zambia, Africa, it's towards value addition rather than extracting raw materials and exporting raw materials, but to extract this and process them in the country in joint venture with others." End of quote. Zambia is the top producer of copper since Hichilema's election. Western countries have been courting him. The French Secretary of State in charge of the development of Francophonie and international partnerships, Kreisula Zacharopolo, recently cited Zambia as an example of a democratic country that can feed Southern Africa and which has become an important partner to France. Hichilema said Paris was the place where to ensure that debt restructuring issue is resolved so as to devote resources, time and attention on development. So you are now up to date. About 11:30 a.m. here in Nairobi is African time. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, depending on where you're tuned in and watching us from. And I do agree partly with what President Hichilema, President of Zambia, is saying about debt restructuring and debt forgiveness and what he calls economic diplomacy. I think I do agree with him to some large extent. We know the economies of a lot of African countries has been battered during the COVID period and all that. So a lot of these economies are just trying to start working properly, but not just in Africa, but across the world. So I do agree with him about these interventions that perhaps could help, especially debt restructuring and as well as forgiving some of these debts. Up to there, we agree. The problem I have, and I'll record back what he was saying while he was in France. I'll quote President Hichilema, Hakainde Hichilema. Our continent, Africa, has been lagging behind, the Zambian president said. We must do something drastic to lift Africa up. First of all, I agree totally with what you're saying up to there. Why are you saying this in France? This sounds like a speech that you're supposed to make at the headquarters of African Union in Addis Ababa. Why are you standing beside France's leader, Emmanuel Macron, whose country has a bad history of taking advantage of countries here in Africa, building the economy through the sweat and blood and the resources of the people of Africa? Then you're standing beside him in Paris, not in Addis Ababa, not in Nairobi, not in Pretoria, not in Cairo, not in Abuja, Nigeria, for heaven's sakes. And you're saying that our continent, Africa, has been lagging behind and we must do something dramatic to lift African up. That is the kind of conversation you're supposed to be having with other heads of state. Because I see Kenyan president is also having a similar kind of a policy shift towards looking inwards in Africa and trying to see if we can find solutions within us, and demanding for Africa's rightful place in the international system to be respected, and the part that we play to be appreciated. That's what he said. But I'll be looking to see if his policies will align with the sentiments of President Ruto. I'll be following on that and see if that aligns. But even with that, I feel this is a conversation, President Hichilema, that you were supposed to be having with your peers from this continent when you meet and you guys have those summits that you have at the African Union or whatever, or you have these bilateral meetings that you have across the continent. This is the kinds of conversation you're supposed to be having, because if you feel like drastic change and Africa needs, something must be done to lift Africa up drastically, then Africa must stop to look into the West, to look to the East, and to look in other areas in the world, expecting that these are the areas that are supposed to make this drastic lifting of Africa. It is a shame that you're making such a statement in Paris. Paris is not going to help you achieve this drastic, dramatic, you're calling it dramatic lift, that is going to lift Africa up. Africa must stop. You don't hear Europe coming here, or European Union, or even Macron coming here and he's wailing on how France is badly off. They don't. And France has a lot of problems. They have their own issues over there. Okay? But you don't, when they come into the continent and they're meeting with our leaders, you don't hear them lament about their countries, because they understand the position and how powerful they are in terms of representing their countries. So they do it with dignity. They talk about their countries with dignity, even with the protests that we've been seeing happening in France. All those chaos. But President Macron, when he's, especially when they're visiting in this continent, and him and others, they speak about their countries and they make reference to their countries with a lot of dignity and respect. But us, every time we meet them, especially when we visit over there, it's just lamentation. We just paint a picture, a narrative that they already created, but we help them in pushing this horrible narrative about Africa. Why do you have to go there and say Africa needs a dramatic lift? It does need a dramatic lift. But do you expect France to do that for us? Have you not seen the history of France in this continent? Do you expect the European Union or the US or China or Russia or Japan or these countries that are jostling in the power struggles in the international system? They have their own issues. And when he has called you to go there and meet up with him, please understand, Zambia's president, that this most likely is not for your good. They'll make you feel like you stand to benefit, because France now is facing a lot of problems with its former colonies. So it's trying to look for new allies from the rest of other countries and trying to make, look for more stronger diplomatic ties. Okay, because its interests have been challenged in Mali, Burkina Faso, Central African Republic, and other countries, Senegal even, and other countries. Its former colonies that were very important, especially to its economy. So now France is just gesturing and posturing and acting to look like it's looking for other partners for its own benefit. So while he's calling you in Paris, rolling out this red carpet, you go there without an agenda. Instead, all you're carrying is the Book of Lamentation. Shut up. Just stop it. Our leaders should learn to just have a bit of dignity. You argue and you complain about how the world is not treating you with respect, while you don't even carry that respect when you present yourself to the world. If all you do is come from a position of vulnerability and victim playing all the time, come on, this is not going to work for us. Okay, so after you've said that something needs to be done, and of course alluding to Africa is lagging behind, France is part of that problem as to why Africa is lagging behind, in case you didn't know, President Hichilema. And we cannot continue with the old ways. I agree. Let's work on corruption. What are the old ways that have been making this continent lag behind? That's why I was saying, these statements you're making here are very important, but you made it at the wrong venue. These are some things that you're supposed to be sitting down with your peers from this continent and discussing. When you meet in these meetings, you meet in these blocks, you meet, is whether SADC or ECOWAS or ESC or whatever block you meet, or African Union, when you meet, these are the kinds of conversations that you are supposed to be having so that you can craft ways in getting Africa from lagging behind, because we have been for a long time. That is not news. And so finding ways by which, one, we can start implementing the AFCTFA. Remember that free trade that you guys passed, agreed upon since 2000. When was it? I can't remember the exact date. I don't want to mislead you, but just recently, I think in 2021, thereabout, and this has not been implemented. How do we discuss this? How can you push your fellow leaders in this continent to implement and to start making things like this workable so that the continent can lift itself up? France is not going to do that for us. Britain is not going to do that for us. European Union, the US, China, these people are only looking out after their own interest. And everything they do, they've sat down and they've calculated based on their foreign policy. Okay, if you want to achieve this, then this is how we have to go round about it. All right, so let's use funds as a means of bringing them closer, as a bait, so that we're able to get, at the end of the day, what we need to get and how we need to fulfill our foreign policy. So don't think all these things they do is because they're very philanthropic and they have so much surplus in terms of wealth that they have nowhere else to take it but to bring it here. Look at the US. Have you seen stories? The ghettos and things like that, and homelessness and things like that. It cannot even afford to provide free housing. It's not like Germany. Germany, there are free housing by the government for those who are jobless, and for those, you can't even find a homeless person in there. Okay? And that's why, as much as Germany is a very powerful country in the international system, you hardly find itself getting into this politicking so much, because it's busy building its economy and to ensure that its people are okay. And you're paid very well. If you're not going to work, you're given a house and you're given some monthly payment. And they don't have secluded areas where people who are jobless go and stay. And all this housing, you'll find them in suburbs, because they want all the communities to be integrated. You'll find this free housing low income housing by the government in the suburbs, like if it's in Kenya, in Lavington, in Runda, they're mixed up to ensure there's that cohesive. And when you see all those refugees, ask yourself, why do we have all these refugees that were accepted in that country from Syria and these other places, but they've been able to settle down? You go to school, you study German, that is the first thing. Then you are integrated. They make sure you are integrated. So even as you learn to get and settle in the community, you feel part of, and they have strategic programs to ensure that. Look at France. What is happening there? What's going on? So even they have their own issues. They have their own social things. It's not perfect. It's better. Certainly it's better than what we have here. But all this surplus money could go into solving some of those problems. But instead they choose to pump it in certain sectors here in Africa. That is because this continent is very important for them. And this is an investment they're doing, and they're hoping to reap along the way. If not now, in the future. So nothing is ever free. Nothing in economics, nothing is ever free. So the US is saying we are going to give you medicine for tuberculosis and support your HIV, AIDS, free medication will support that. It is not for free. Understand that. Nothing is ever for free, and sometimes the price tag that we get to pay for that, it becomes too much. If only we were able to handle our issues in this continent very, very well. So President is saying, Hakainde Hichilema says now we cannot continue with the old ways. And that's why in our talk with President Macron, as I said, it was a debt issue, but also the opportunities for investment and for trade. That is great. But there are other things that surely, some conversations that we cannot be going out there and hoping that the other leaders from outside the continent can help us solve. Because we already know the problems that ache this continent. We lack proper leaders. We have poor governance structures. Our countries are riddled with heightened corruption. If we can solve these things, if we can address the issue of corruption especially, then we will have halfway solved some of these problems, and we will not have to embarrass ourselves all the time having meetings with these other leaders, and all we have to do is stand beside them and lament on how Africa is lagging behind and how Africa needs a dramatic lift. Only Africa is going to lift itself. Only Africa is going to do that, because it is in the interest of the global north to keep Africa and other countries in the global south as they are suppressed. That international system has been built like that, okay? It has been built like that so that it's able to function properly. So if you today got some sense and decided that you take your own future and your own matters into your hand and start working on building Africa because it's possible, you will see how the international system will be upset. You'll see how it will be disrupted. So if you're hoping that Macron is a solution to this continent, or France, or the US is the solution, oh boy, you're going to wait for a very long time until the leadership of this country wakes up and realize nobody is coming to save us at all, and realize if Africa moves forward, then it has to be an effort made by its people. If Africa is to develop, then that agenda has to come from us with a proper strategy and put people in place who can steer this continent forward. Until we do that, we take up responsibility of building and restructuring this continent, then we'll continue hearing these silly statements by our leaders when they visit abroad, and it's very shameful, President Hakainde. But I do agree with you. We need debt restructuring. We need to have collaborative opportunities in terms of investment and trade. That is welcome. But the rest of your statements is just, I don't agree with all that. Okay. Now South Africa seems to be in trouble. News came up yesterday that, let me look for that piece of news. Okay, so U.S. Ambassador to Pretoria made a damning accusation against the South African government, and it seems to have caught South African officials off guard. Ambassador Ruben Brigetti says that the U.S. has reliable intelligence that South Africa supplied arms and ammunition to Russian ship which had docked for 2 days at the Simon's Town naval base last December. So during this war, so South Africa is being accused of supplying weapons to Russia. You know, now there's allegations, but when I sit down and think about it, like I am right now, I'm actively thinking, this drill that happened in South Africa around, was it February or March? It did happen, I think February, coinciding with the anniversary of the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. And it was insisted for it to happen in South Africa. And I remember thinking it's not, because South Africa has said it wants to stay neutral, but allowing for this military drill to happen in its soil, especially during that time, and during this time that the conflict is ongoing, I think it's of bad taste, and maybe not a very wise thing to do as far as diplomacy at the end of it all. Because South Africa does not just have diplomatic ties with Russia alone. It does have other ties with the rest of the world. And so whatever it does must be calculated and must be seen to be balanced. But it appears it has such a, I don't want to say a blind loyalty, but it has such high loyalty to Russia. Sometimes it other things are at stake in manner in which it makes decision. So this U.S. ambassador is now saying that they do have credible reports and prove that South Africa provided for ammunition to Russia through a ship that docked. You know, in January, a Russian oligarch, there's been leaks of information here and there, and if you've been watching how South Africa is behaving, okay? A Russian oligarch in January, is it in January or December, supported or funded the meeting of ANC party. And I made a lot of noise about it here. Because I'm thinking, even if you're receiving support and donations from countries, which is okay, and individuals like the oligarchs, which is fine if you need it, but there are certain aspects of our lives and parts of our internal sectors that no external power or actor is supposed to be involved in. I've always had issues with the fact that we cannot even fund our electoral processes. So we have these external actors funding these processes, and then they start interfering and we make noise about it. Because if you let them fund these processes, you're involving them. So you can't tell them, give us the money and then find something else to do. We'll come back and we'll let you know what happened. No. If they give you that money, then they will oversee, they have their interests, sometimes they even have their preferred candidates and things like that. So they will start meddling and interfering. So there are certain things that should be very sacred in a country, especially in developing democracies like ours, that we should not allow for the participation of another external actor. Okay? And that was the problem, and that was the case with the ANC when it had this summit or convention it had for the party and party delegates. And it could not, I don't believe that South Africa the ANC party could not fund its own meeting. I disagree with that. So this Russian oligarch was kind enough, very philanthropic. He's an oligarch, so he has money and also very close ties with the president, Putin. Usually it works like that. For you to be an oligarch, then you are very close with the presidency. And if I had time, I would have brought you the issue of the history of oligarchy and how that even came to be. But I will divert from that. That is not my point of concern right now. But these are things that have been happening that makes you question or makes you wonder what is really going on with South Africa and Russia. So these allegations, they are allegations, But, the US is saying that they do have substantial proof for this. And knowing US how we know US, by the time they're coming out with such a statement, then likely they actually do have proof over what is happening. But also knowing US, in reference to what happened in Iraq when they told us there were weapons of mass destruction and they led a very long war and none of that were found, that could make you also take this with a bit of a grain of salt, okay? Because US is one country that will go after its interest. And when it feels its interest is being threatened in any form or way in any country, US will do anything. They can even cause a war. So that their interests are not bungled. And we've seen that happen, so this is not even far-fetched. But these allegations, but what really gives these allegations weight is the fact that while President Ramaphosa was he was in Parliament to answer questions yesterday, and this matter was brought up. You know what he said? The whole matter is being looked into. Allow the process to continue. In time, we will be able to speak about it. He is the commander-in-chief, okay? So if this was a thing that really did not happen, and he did not have any knowledge of, that is something he would categorically stand in that parliament and say, no, that did not happen, because there's no way such a thing could happen without his knowledge. And the fact that he's saying the matter is being looked into, that makes me have some believe this report, these allegations that are being made by the US ambassador in Pretoria. And he says, allow the process to continue. What process? What is going on, President Ramaphosa? And you're saying in time, you'll be able to speak on it. You'll be able to go, make a very nice statement and play some public relations. That's what you're saying. Because if that was not the truth, that is something you would have stood there while you're answering that question and the rest of questions that are being posed to you, Mr. President, and said categorically no. As much as you're having a good diplomatic relations with Russia, but there's no way, shape, or form that our country, South Africa, ever provided for firearms or any other kind of ammunition during that time that is being specified. Because usually it's us who buy these arms from Russia. South Africa does not manufacture these arms. And so the fact that the president could not even give a categorical answer, and he said this matter will be looked into and allow the process to continue, I'm like, what process? What is going on? So I think it's interesting, and we shall, personally, I'm invested now. So I'll be looking to see how this will play out and what else they get to find. Ramaphosa is just becoming something else. And still staying with South Africa, former president's daughter, Zuma, his daughter, Duduzile, she's very famous and she has a lot of following in social media, especially on Twitter. So according to a UK-based organization, they're saying that she seems to be supporting or driving a Russian agenda in regards to the Ukraine war. She's been busy, it's like she's been working on behalf of the Russians when it comes to this Ukraine war in terms of passing out information on behalf of Russia. So the Center for Information Resilience says pro-Russian tweets by Duduzile Zuma were at the forefront of Moscow's drive to sway public opinion to its side in South Africa and beyond. Okay, that is quite something. Yeah, so the researchers relied on the personal nature of what has been posted on the account, including photographs and the discussion in South African media of the tweets as evidence that she owns it. South Africa has come under attack from the West over its neutral stance on Ukraine. First of all, sorry, this Duduzile is not an official in the South African government. As much as she is famous because, of course, of her ties with her former father, the former president, but she's also a very active person on Twitter. And I think if she personally feels that she has support for Russia, I don't know how that is the problem to the UK. I don't know how that is problematic to the UK. I think you can't start policing and telling people who to support or what not to support. Okay, and especially when it comes to this war on invasion in Ukraine. And when you are asking for forcing Africa to take certain positions, I think let people be. And when it comes to governments, that is a different case. Work on that through your diplomacy channels. This is a private citizen. Why is this a problem? If she feels she wants to support Russia, she wants to support US, she wants to show her support to whichever country, I think it's within her right. And now you can't raise this as a problem, accusing her of supporting Russian military. Okay? So I don't think this is here nor there, but I think it makes it much of a news because of her being the daughter of the former president. But otherwise, she is a private citizen, so I don't think she is obligated to handle certain things diplomatically in a way that you would expect for maybe a head of state or a government representative to act or to have positions on these matters. She is a private citizen, so I think Duduzile can do whatever she wants. She can do whatever she wants, I believe. Okay, now let's get back to Sudan. There was an agreement that was signed yesterday. At least we're starting to get something from Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. Remember, there's a meeting that has been happening there that is being supported by Saudi Arabia, US, and now the United Nations. They seem to have forgotten the process that was being pushed by IGAD. And I think they're very eager to just take up all this process and just rubbish what else IGAD has been trying to do. Because the IGAD process does not seem to have support from these bodies, even from African Union itself, which is quite unfortunate. And I still insist the mediation process of Sudan should be held in Sudan. Okay, so a couple of developments now. Early on Thursday, the UN Human Rights Council barely managed to pass a motion to increase monitoring of human rights abuses in Sudan. So they passed that. The UN Human Rights Council has voted to increase monitoring of human rights abuses in Sudan. A total of 18 countries voted in favor of the Western-led initiative at a special session in Geneva, while 15 voted against and 14 abstained. I'll come back to that part. But let's just move on to, they did agree, the army officials, the representatives in Jeddah, not at the UN in Jeddah, in Saudi Arabia, the representatives of the army and the paramilitary forces who have been fighting for nearly a month now, signed an agreement on a declaration of commitment to protect the civilians of Sudan. But this is not a truce. This is not a ceasefire. So they're saying even in their fighting and crossfires and all that, they all have a responsibility to protect the civilians and to move from areas where civilians are sheltering. The RF, what do you call it? The Sudan. All right. The military force, okay? Led by Hemeti, all right, has been accused of sheltering itself in hospitals and these other areas that civilians were. So the government forces, army, went after them, irregardless whether there were civilians there or not. So that is what contributed to the high number of casualties we've seen of the deaths of civilians in that regard. So this part of this agreement said, the agreement requires both sides to permit humanitarian assistance to allow for the restoration of electricity, water, and other basic services, to withdraw security forces from hospitals, and to arrange for respectful burial of the dead. So they're being called upon that whatever they're seeing any civilian activity going on, whichever side, whether it's the army that is present in that area or the paramilitary, they do have a duty and a responsibility to protect the citizens and to see that no harm comes their way and to have minimal harm as possible. So that is what they they signed into an agreement. So no African country, going back to that vote that happened in Geneva. So no African country voted in favor of the initiative. Sudanese Ambassador Hassan Hamid Hassan said the conflict was internal and reiterated the refrain of African solutions to African problems. Look at that. That is the time we become very, we become very independent. And that is where the time we remind the world that we are sovereign countries. So early on Thursday, the UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk urged countries with influence in Africa to encourage Sudan's warring sides to end the fighting. Why are you urging countries with influence on Africa? Why can't you let Africa solve its problem? Why do we need this country with their influence and their interest that have caused this problem in the first place? These are the countries you're asking, as if Africa can't help itself. This is disrespectful, first of all. You can't urge countries with influence in Africa. This influence is what we are trying to get rid of, at least. That is what a few of our leaders have expressed. So you cannot be encouraging them to come here and cause more problem. They are the problem in the first place. So addressing an emergency, that is just a bad attitude. You see how the international community look at us and how they even talk down on us, as if this problem left to Africa. Africa cannot solve its own problem. Did we not solve the problem in Ethiopia? Why is the international actors insisting on meddling and being involved in this crisis? But from what they're saying, they feel like Africa can handle this, so they're asking for those countries with influence in Africa to encourage Sudan's warring sides, because African leaders cannot do that. What a shame. Now, addressing an emergency session on the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, Turk said the conflict has pushed this much suffering country into a catastrophe. Fighting in Sudan's capital worsened on Wednesday, with witnesses reporting airstrikes, rocket-propelled grenades and gunfire in several neighborhoods. And in recent weeks, there has been concerns, including from U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, that Russia's Wagner mercenary group was involved in the conflict. Wagner's head, Yevgeny Prigozhin, said Thursday that the paramilitary group was not operating in Sudan and had not been involved in politics there since army officers deposed Omar al-Bashir in 2019, according to Reuters. Delegations from the army and the RSF have been meeting in Saudi Arabia for a week now. The opposing generals are former allies who together orchestrated the October 2021 military coup that derailed a transition to civilian rule following the 2019 ousting of Bashir. So this is the point. This motion that was passed yesterday that Sudan is opposing and that was not voted upon by other African countries was to give the UN body more powers to investigate what is going on in Sudan. So as you continue maiming people and killing and all that, someone is documenting all this. And as the opportune time, when that time will arrive, on top of the existing case between Sudan and the ICC, these new charges will be added. Understand? Okay, so that's why they're insisting on the UN body to come in there and expand on its investigation, even as the fighting continues. And so, that is what is bringing problems. The UN Human Rights Council voted to increase monitoring of human rights abuses in Sudan, and Sudan opposed this. Sudan vigorously opposed the motion, and of course, African countries, none of it voted in support of that, and is arguing that the conflict was an internal affair. Well, while I oppose, and I do support your African problems to African solutions, but you've not even been keen on listening to Africans, Sudan generals. But when it's very convenient for you, that is when you use that as a cover. African problems to African solutions. This is no longer an internal affair. This conflict has been internationalized. There's something you call internationalization of a conflict in the international relations. And Sudan conflict is no longer an internal affair with all these players involved in your conflict. All these people that you have allowed to use your country as a fighting field and use you to fight against each other. This conflict, as much as it has to do with the two warring sides of Sudanese army, one paramilitary side and the other one the official national army, but this conflict has taken on an international nature. When you see other bodies coming in, when you see IGAD being involved, as much as it is a regional body, but that already allows it now to have taken an international nature. When you see the United Nations making statements about what is going on, it is no longer an internal affair. Sudan, you cannot say that this conflict is an internal affair. We can't stay still while you continue fighting senselessly and you continue putting the lives of the people of Sudan in danger. Responsibility of other states in the international system, or how that has been according to the international laws and norms, it does not allow the rest of the world to fold their arms and hope that you'll figure this thing out. You should have figured this conflict out before it blew out of proportion. You should have had talks. You should have called a truce. You should have de-escalated. But you have proven to your people and the rest of the world that you were incapable. And now the rest of us have to step in to help you solve this problem. But a lot of these people who are stepping in from the international actors, they really don't care about you. They're only looking out after their own interest. But they're there trying to help you solve this problem. So the US and Saudi Arabia are already leading that process. So why are you sending representatives in that mediation? If this is an internal matter, you shouldn't be having representatives in Jeddah. So as long as another mediator has come and is being involved, it has ceased to be an internal affair. Are you not attending the mediation in Jeddah that is being supported by the US and the UN? So that in its effect is an internationalized conflict. So that thing of internal affair, leave it to us. No. In fact, the conflict in Ethiopia was more of an internal affair because Ethiopia locked everybody else out and dealt with that issue the way it could deal with it. And when it became too much to handle, it agreed on African Union to mediate that. But even with the African Union mediating that, it made that conflict an international affair. Okay? So you can't say this is an internal affair. It is not. Army and the paramilitary junta. This is not. This is an international conflict, and you have made it so because of your lack of sense and responsibility and, all these things that has made you now have everybody else coming in and talking to you about how you need to handle this conflict. And I do support the UN's position of wanting to extend its investigations on human rights. I absolutely support that, because if you don't want to be held accountable, and some of you still has that ICC cloud chip on your shoulders, so you're adding more to that, then that's on you. We need the United Nations to go in there and to continue with their filing and monitoring how human rights abuses are going on there. So I do support that. And the fact that African countries did not vote to support that position, that tells you something. The UN wants to monitor human rights abuses. Why do you not want the UN to do that? If you do want the UN to be involved, then stop fighting, talk, and find solutions. But you can't keep causing all these atrocities, and at the end of the day, you want to stop as Ethiopia stopped and just move on as if nothing happened. There has to be some level of accountability. So if you continue fighting, then somebody needs to be there to take note and to record everything that is going on, so that at the right time, you might go to the ICC or elsewhere, or at least we will know what is happening there. All right, I want to end with a story that I took my time yesterday in the afternoon to have a whole show just talking about, and that is the issue of East African Community Regional Force. And I was appalled by the sentiments of President Tshisekedi when he visited. He went on a SADC summit in Namibia, and then later on he went to Botswana. So he met with the presidents of these countries. And while he was there, let me use just a street language. He was trash talking the East African community. All right, excuse me. Okay? He had nothing good to say about the EAC and the forces that are there to help him in stabilizing his country. He had nothing good to say. Like you, our men and women have been there under very dire conditions, under very stressful conditions. Do you know they live in the bushes? The soldiers that go there in these peace missions, they don't have lovely, luxurious homes or camps they stay. These are army officials who go there and live in the forest, and they're up 24 hours to keep an eye and to ensure the people that they were sent there to protect, they are doing that. All right, fine, I agree. They've not been doing great on that, but they do this job. These peacekeeping, peace building missions are not rosy. So they allow themselves to go through all this trouble. On top of that, our countries are spending so much money in support of these missions. We have sacrificed President Tshisekedi. Kenya has sacrificed, Uganda has been sacrificing, South Sudan, of all the countries in this continent, cannot even pay its remittance to the East African community and the African Union because it can't afford. But it managed to spare a bit of its US dollars, thousands, to support its forces in coming to the DRC. Burundian soldiers. And you have the audacity to go to SADC and make the statements that you made on Monday and on Tuesday. I think it is uncalled for. And what really pissed me off yesterday, when I was going through that story, is when you say that you're watching to see how the EAC are performing, and come June, you want them out of that country, never to return back. These are our soldiers. These are people that we honor. When you come to Kenya and how we treat and how we look at our military, these are people that we respect. We sleep comfortably in our homes because we know we have a strong professional army looking after the interest of the people of Kenya and protecting the territorial boundary of the Republic of Kenya. So we honor them. We respect them. Okay? What army symbolizes to this country is something that you can never understand, because that is not how the army in your country behave. So for them to come there and for you to have these kinds of sentiments against them, like, this is very disrespectful. And not just for the Kenyan defense forces, but other countries that have given their forces there to help you. And for you to go to Namibia and to Botswana and to say, we give them up to June. If they don't meet their obligation or the mandate or whatever, then they will leave their country, never to come back again. What? These people have a place to call home, and they will come back and they'll go back, sit in their barracks and just enjoy their salaries and do whatever it is that they do. Because we don't have an active war that we're doing here. Okay? I don't think they're even celebrating, sitting there in those harsh conditions, But it's out of respect. It is out of the spirit of brotherhood that we have in this community that these heads of state in the East African community decided to jump in and help you. But if you're not appreciative of this, so let me just read what the EAC Secretary General Peter Muthuki said. He urged the DRC's leader to respect regional states. That's what I disrespect. The Secretariat is responsible to do that. And that's how you do it. President Tshisekedi, if you are dissatisfied or you're having problems or there are things you feel are not working well, there are proper channels to address these matters. You are a head of state, for heaven's sake. You have a reach to the rest of the heads of state, and you guys can have a meeting even on Zoom and iron out these issues. But if you come out in public and make these statements that goes to even jeopardize the lives of the soldiers in the DRC, because that is what I was watching a few news items, and that is how Congolese say. They're saying this EAC force has been here, but they're not helping us, so we don't know why they're here. And now these forces are being targeted. And you're annoyed that General Nyaga, Major General, came out and said this because of the careless sentiments that you made there earlier. And so I think, this is just my position, so that the relationship, because now DRC is in the East African community, and we don't want that. I think we should not even seek to renew this soldiers' mandate. June is just next month. Let them leave. And we can support DRC from a distance, but let our soldiers leave. If they cannot be appreciated, the sacrifice they're making cannot be appreciated, and their presence there is being treated the way they're being treated, then we don't need to subject our soldiers to this unnecessary humiliation, unnecessary political personal vendetta that President Tshisekedi has against President Paul Kagame. We know that. They cannot be doing your dirty work, and they refuse to do that. Okay? They cannot do that. So we cannot subject our soldiers to these kinds of treatment. So I would suggest, again, probably someone has been watching, because everything we talk about here, we see immediate responses. Okay? So my suggestion is, for the East African community, not to push for any renewal. Let the soldiers leave, so that we don't mess up the diplomatic ties that the rest of the countries have with the DRC. We're able to maintain that, and we're able to build on that, and we can support the DRC, but from a distance, and let the SADC soldiers come in, and perhaps they'll be able to do that which President Tshisekedi wants them to do, and that is take on combatantly against the M23. Otherwise, President Tshisekedi owes the rest of us an apology. He needs to. He absolutely needs to, and he needs to take those words back, because they were absolutely disrespectful and completely out of order. And he needs to have some diplomacy classes, or he needs to have some diplomatic advisors just close to his ear and tell him to stop these erratic talks he keeps saying, without even thinking of the kind of impact it will have. You're a head of state, for heaven's sakes. If you're having problem with the way the Kenyan contingent is because he had specific words on that, you could call President Ruto and talk it out. He is the commander-in-chief. Talk it out and see how you can solve that diplomatically, not being erratic in the manner that you have been. Well, all we have done in this blog is try to help, and the East African community has been nothing but welcoming and accommodating to the DRC, even with all these problems that it has brought and it is now creating in this bloc. So I think President Tshisekedi or the rest of the member states an apology, and you need to do better on your diplomatic engagements, because you are lacking so much, and such sentiments or such diplomatic mishaps can really cause a lot of harm in this system, okay? In this subordinate system of the East African bloc. It might cause a lot of harm that might not be fixed moving forward. You're having problems already with certain countries. Why do you want to create any more problems, especially with Kenya? That has been nothing but supportive, and the other countries. So come on now, you need to do better. All right, I think I've vented enough on behalf of the EAC, on behalf of Kenya. I'm sure that is how my president feels, but he's the president. He can't talk like me. So thank you very much. I've done it. You're welcome. And on behalf of South Sudan and other countries. And of course, all the conversations that we've had there earlier. I want to thank you so much for watching. I'll see you here some other time. I hope that you have a wonderful weekend. My name is Miriam Ogutu. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.